My sister stole my millionaire fiancé. 15 years later, at our mother's funeral, we met again. She went into complete shock when she saw my son, who was the spitting image of her husband. Zuri never forgot the day her world collapsed. Everything was set for the wedding. The silk gown hung pristine in her bedroom in Atlanta's historic West End. Guests were starting to arrive, and the Georgia sun blazed with an intensity that promised a perfect day. But that perfection crumbled in a single, devastating moment. Zuri had gone upstairs to the master suite, seeking a few minutes of calm before the ceremony, when she heard muffled laughter coming from one of the guest rooms. Curiosity, mixed with a strange feeling of dread, led her to push the door open. It was barely ajar. What she saw on the other side was a scene that would haunt her forever. Her fiancé, Jalil, the man she was about to marry, was locked in a passionate embrace, kissing her younger sister, Serafina. Time seemed to freeze. Zuri was paralyzed, unable to process what her eyes were seeing. Her mind desperately searched for an explanation, an excuse, anything that could justify what was happening. But the crushing reality hit her with overwhelming force. Jalil, the man she dreamed of building a life with, was betraying her in the cruelest way possible, and Serafina, her own flesh and blood, was giving herself to him without remorse. How could you? The words left Zuri's lips as a wounded, barely audible whisper, yet they were loud enough to break the spell that held the two lovers oblivious to her presence. Serafina recoiled abruptly from Jalil, her eyes wide with surprise, and for a brief instant, guilt. But it was Jalil who spoke first, grasping for words that might repair the irreparable. "Zuri, baby, wait. This isn't what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like, and Zuri knew it. The betrayal plunged into her heart like a knife. In that instant, everything that had ever mattered to her disintegrated. There were no screams, no tears, no dramatic confrontation. Zuri simply turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind her future, her love, and any hope she had ever had of happiness with Jalil. 15 years had passed since that day. 15 years that Zuri had spent rebuilding her life from the ruins that Serafina and Jalil left in their wake. Now, the brick-and-mortar church in Charlotte, North Carolina, where her mother, Althea's funeral was being held, was filled with oppressive melancholy. The overcast sky reflected the mood of the few attendees, mostly old acquaintances who had watched the two sisters drift apart and take separate paths since that fateful afternoon. Zuri stood before her mother's casket, thinking about the irony of Althea's death bringing them back together. Her mother had been the only one who, over all those years, had tried in vain to reconcile the two sisters. But Zuri's resentment had been stronger than any blood tie. Across the sanctuary, Serafina stood in silence with Jalil at her side. She was almost unrecognizable. The vivacious, ambitious young woman she once was had become a defeated woman, burdened by the weight of her choices. Jalil, for his part, showed the ravages of years of alcohol abuse. His face, once handsome, was now etched with lines of suffering and decay. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with unexpressed but clearly present hostility. Zuri hadn't spoken to Serafina since the day of the betrayal, and the mere thought of having to exchange words with her now made her stomach churn. Zuri's current husband, Imani, stood close by, offering silent support. Next to him, their 15-year-old son, Kian, observed everything with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. Although he carried Imani's last name and had been raised as his own child, Kian never knew the true story of his origin. To him, Jalil was nothing more than a stranger, though Zuri knew that, with time, the physical similarities between the two men would make it impossible to hide the truth. Zuri took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure as the pastor began the service. The words about life and death floated in the air, but to Zuri, everything felt distant, as if she were watching the scene from outside her own body. When the ceremony concluded, people began to approach Zuri to offer their condolences. It was then that Serafina, accompanied by Jalil, walked toward her. Zuri felt time stop again, as if those 15 years had vanished, and she was back at the door of that room, watching her life fall apart. "Zuri," Serafina began, her voice weak, barely a whisper. Her eyes reflected a deep exhaustion, a sadness Zuri had never seen in her. "I didn't want us to meet again like this." "It doesn't matter how we meet, Serafina. What you did is unforgivable," Zuri replied coolly. There was no hatred in her voice, only an unyielding resolve not to be pulled back into the pain. "Please, let me explain." Serafina tried to step closer, but Zuri took a step back, as if mere physical contact could infect her with her sister's mistakes. "Explain what? How you betrayed me? How you destroyed the only thing that ever meant something to me?" Zuri's voice rose, charged with emotions she had repressed for too long. "There's nothing you can say that will change what happened." Before Serafina could respond, Jalil intervened. His voice, hoarse from years of drinking, tried to sound conciliatory, but only accentuated the tension. "Zuri, we all made mistakes. What happened back then shouldn't define us now." Zuri looked at him with a mixture of contempt and pity. "It shouldn't define us, Jalil. That betrayal defined everything. But it doesn't matter to me anymore. My life hasn't stopped since then. I've moved on, and I don't need your repentance to close that wound." Serafina tried to approach again, her eyes full of unshed tears. "Zuri, I've changed. My life hasn't been easy, and I understand if you can't forgive me, but at least let me try." "This isn't about forgiveness, Serafina. It's about realizing that some things, once broken, can never be fixed." Zuri looked at her sister, feeling a pang of compassion for the first time, but it wasn't enough to erase the pain that still burned in her chest. "Mom is gone, and I know this is hard for you too, but we can't go back. What you did was unforgivable, and nothing you say will change that." Imani, sensing the rising tension, approached Zuri and placed a hand on her back for support. "Let's go, Zuri. It's time to leave." Before they could turn away, Jalil, who had been silent up to that moment, fixed his gaze on Kian, as if something about the boy looked strangely familiar. "Wait, that kid, who is he?" Zuri's heart skipped a beat. She knew this moment would come, but she wasn't prepared to face it here, in the middle of a church, with everyone's eyes on them. "He's my son," she answered with a firmness she didn't feel. "Your son?" Jalil repeated. His eyes narrowed as he tried to connect the pieces in his confused mind. "And his father?" "His father is Imani," Zuri said quickly, but the doubt in her words was evident to anyone paying attention. Jalil stared at Kian one more time, his mind struggling to grasp what his eyes were telling him. Serafina, meanwhile, began silently putting the pieces together, sensing that something dark and painful was about to be revealed. Imani, ever protective, decided to intervene. "This isn't the place for this, Jalil. Let Zuri and Kian leave in peace." But Zuri knew the peace she sought was fleeting. The ghosts of the past she had tried to bury were emerging with a force she couldn't stop. As Imani and Kian led her out of the church, Zuri couldn't help but look back at Serafina and Jalil, standing there, each grappling with their own personal hell. The storm that was brewing would test not only the bonds of blood, but also Zuri's strength to keep her life and family intact. The coming days would reveal truths that had been buried for far too long. And when everything finally came to light, nothing would ever be the same. Leaving the church had left an indelible mark on Zuri's heart. As the SUV drove through the wet streets of Washington, D.C., she felt that the weight of the past she had tried to bury for 15 years was about to crush her. The silence inside the vehicle was oppressive. Imani, at the wheel, kept his gaze fixed on the road, while Kian, sitting in the back, looked at his mother with a mixture of confusion and uncertainty. Zuri knew the question she feared most was coming, and she wasn't wrong. "Mom, why was that man looking at me like that? Who is he, really?" Kian's voice broke the silence, filling the space with an anxiety Zuri couldn't ignore. Zuri's heart sank. The moment she had always dreaded had arrived. She inhaled deeply, searching for the right words to shield her son from the cruel reality without betraying the truth. Kian, Jalil is someone who was part of my life a long time ago. He's not someone you need to worry about. Kian frowned, noticing the evasion in his mother's words. But he looked at me like he knew me, Mom. I need to know the truth. Why have you never told me about him? Imani intervened before Zuri could respond, his voice firm but full of tenderness. Kian, what you need to know is that your mother and I have always done what's best for you. There's nothing more important than your well-being. Kian wasn't satisfied with the answer, but he understood he wouldn't get any more information right now. He crossed his arms and sank into his seat, staring out the window, but the questions continued to burn in his mind. Zuri felt the tension in her chest increase with every mile they drove. She knew she couldn't avoid this conversation much longer. Jalil had left a scar on her life, and now his presence threatened to open old wounds that had never truly healed. They arrived home, and the sound of the rain on the roof seemed to mirror the chaos Zuri felt inside. Kian retreated to his room without another word, leaving Zuri and Imani alone in the living room. Imani approached Zuri and embraced her. His presence had always been a comfort, but tonight the hug felt different. There was a distance between them, a chasm that words couldn't fill. "We have to talk about what happened today," Imani said in a low, almost whispered voice. Zuri nodded, knowing the time had come to face what she had been avoiding for so many years. They sat on the sofa, and Zuri began to speak, her words heavy with the weight of her memories. "I never wanted Kian to find out this way. Jalil, he's part of a past I'd rather forget." Imani looked at her with a mixture of understanding and worry. "Zuri, you knew this moment would come. We can't keep protecting Kian from the truth, not after what happened today." Zuri lowered her gaze, feeling tears well up in her eyes. "I know, Imani, but how do I explain that the man he saw today is his real father? How do I tell him that Jalil betrayed me in the worst way possible, and that Serafina, my own sister, was part of that betrayal?" Imani took Zuri's hand and squeezed it gently. "We'll tell him the truth, but in our own way. Kian has the right to know who he is, but he also has the right to know that he is loved, and that we are his family." Zuri nodded, knowing Imani was right, but the fear of losing her son, of Kian rejecting her or even feeling betrayed by her, was overwhelming. She stood up and walked to the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. The past she had tried so hard to bury was resurfacing, and this time there was no way to avoid it. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Serafina and Jalil returned to their home, a modest, run-down house in a neglected part of Baltimore that mirrored the state of their relationship. Jalil collapsed onto the sofa, opening a fifth of cheap liquor with trembling hands, while Serafina stood, watching him with a mixture of disgust and pity. "What the hell is wrong with you, Jalil?" Serafina broke the silence, her voice charged with frustration. "Today, of all times, you decide to act like a fool in front of Zuri and her son. Do you realize the damage you could have caused?" Jalil looked up, his eyes bloodshot from alcohol. "That boy is my son, isn't he? I always knew it, even if I never wanted to admit it." Serafina felt a pang of anger and desperation. It had been her decision to stay with Jalil, and now, after so many years, her life was a shadow of what she had once dreamed. "Yes, he's your son, but you've never been his father. Imani raised him. He gave him the love and stability you never could offer." Jalil laughed bitterly, taking a long swig from the bottle. "Imani, always so perfect, right? But what do you think will happen when the boy finds out the truth? Do you think he'll keep looking at Zuri the same way? Or at you?" Jalil's words cut into Serafina like daggers. She knew he was right. The truth had always been a double-edged sword, and now that truth was about to be unearthed with unpredictable consequences. "You're a coward, Jalil," Serafina whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "You destroyed Zuri. You ruined my life. And now you're trying to ruin that boy's life. But I won't allow it." Jalil rose clumsily, staggering toward Serafina. "And what are you going to do, Serafina? Are you going to run with your tail between your legs and beg Zuri for forgiveness? Do you think that will fix anything?" Serafina looked at him with a hatred she had been accumulating for years. "Maybe it won't fix anything, but at least I'll try to repair some of the damage I've caused. I can't keep living like this anymore." With those words, Serafina turned and left the house, leaving Jalil alone with his bottle and his demons. She knew she was making a risky decision, but she also knew she couldn't allow the past to control her life anymore. It was time to face Zuri, face the truth, and try to find some way toward redemption. That same night, as Serafina walked through the rain toward Zuri's house, Imani and Zuri discussed how to approach Kian. They sat at the kitchen table, their faces reflecting the gravity of the situation. "We tell him the truth, Zuri," Imani said firmly, "but we have to do it together. He needs to know that no matter what happens, we will always be here for him." Zuri nodded, her mind still struggling to accept the reality of what she was about to do. "I don't want him to hate me, Imani. I don't want to lose my son." "You won't lose him. Kian loves you. You're his mother, and that will never change. But we must be honest with him. He deserves to know the truth." Just then the doorbell rang. Zuri got up, a growing sense of unease inside her. She opened the door and found herself face to face with Serafina, soaked by the rain, with an expression of desperation and repentance on her face. "Zuri, I need to talk to you," Serafina said, her voice trembling as much as her body. Zuri felt a mixture of emotions overwhelm her at the sight of her sister in that state. For an instant, the old wound bled again, but at the same time, she felt a strange desire to know what Serafina had to tell her after so many years of silence. "Come in," Zuri finally said, stepping back to let her pass. Imani watched Serafina cautiously. As she approached the table, Serafina noticed the tension in the air and decided to speak directly. "Zuri, what Jalil said today? I know it hurt you, and I know there's a lot between us that can never be fixed. But please, let me tell you the truth." Zuri crossed her arms, looking at her sister with an expression that mixed distrust and curiosity. "What truth, Serafina? What else could you possibly say that hasn't already shattered me?" Serafina swallowed, knowing that what she was about to say could change everything. "The night Jalil and I were together for the first time, he confessed something to me that I haven't been able to get out of my mind since. I didn't know it until much later. But Imani, he knew Jalil before all this happened. It wasn't a coincidence that he found you. It was part of a plan." Zuri felt the floor vanish beneath her feet. She looked at Imani, searching for some sign that what Serafina was saying wasn't true, but the expression on her husband's face confirmed her worst fear. "Is that true, Imani? You found me as part of a plan? What plan?" Imani closed his eyes, knowing the moment had arrived. "Zuri, at first, yes. It all started as a plan to destroy Jalil. He hurt me badly in the past, something I can't forgive. When I met you, I didn't expect to fall in love with you. Everything changed for me when I realized what I felt for you was real. But yes, at first, I wanted revenge." Zuri felt the air leave her lungs. Everything she thought she knew about her life, about her love for Imani, crumbled before her eyes. Tears began to stream down her face as she tried to comprehend the magnitude of the betrayal. "So, all this time, I've just been a piece in your game of revenge?" Zuri whispered, her voice broken by anguish. "At first, yes," Imani admitted, his voice full of remorse. "But Zuri, I swear I love you. Everything we've built together is real. I didn't want you to find out this way, but I can't keep hiding the truth from you." Zuri clasped her hands over her head, trying to process what she had just heard. The woman who had managed to rebuild her life after one devastating betrayal now found herself back in an abyss of pain and mistrust. And this time, she didn't know if she could crawl out. Serafina, seeing her sister's pain, felt profound remorse. She had come to try to repair something, but had only caused more harm. "Zuri, I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to find out this way, but I thought you deserved to know the truth." Zuri looked up, her eyes filled with tears and pain. "And now what, Serafina? What am I supposed to do with all this? How do I move on?" Serafina had no answers. The truth she had revealed had only served to plunge her sister into an even deeper darkness. And as Zuri broke down in front of her, Serafina understood that perhaps some truths were better left buried. But it was already too late. Zuri looked at Imani, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and betrayal as the rain continued to fall outside, reflecting the chaos that had erupted in her life. And in that moment, Zuri knew that the path forward would be darker and more difficult than she had ever imagined. The weight of the revelations had left Zuri in a state of absolute confusion. After Serafina left, Zuri remained in the living room without speaking. Imani, aware of the magnitude of his betrayal, watched her in silence, waiting for her to speak. But Zuri couldn't find the words. It was as if everything she had built over the last 15 years had been a lie, a carefully orchestrated farce by the person she trusted most. Imani tried to approach her, but Zuri moved away, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and determination. "I need time," was all she said before heading for the door, leaving Imani alone with his guilt. Zuri walked out into the yard where the rain was still falling hard. The cold water hit her, but she didn't care. She walked to the back, where an old wooden bench stood firm despite the years. She sat down and let the tears flow freely, mixing with the rain running down her face. Meanwhile, inside the house, Imani slumped onto the sofa, feeling the weight of the truth crushing him. He knew he had destroyed Zuri's trust, and that regaining it would be nearly impossible. But he also knew he couldn't give up, not after everything they had been through together. He made a decision. He would get up, face Jalil and Serafina, and do everything possible to repair the damage. At that moment, Zuri felt a presence beside her. She looked up and saw Kian, his face full of worry for his mother. "Mom, are you okay?" the young man asked, his voice weighted with the innocence Zuri feared losing. Zuri tried to smile, but it was a broken one. "No, sweetie, but I will be. I just need time to think." Kian sat silently beside her, not knowing what else to say. Although he didn't know all the details, he understood that his mother was going through something very painful, and that made him feel helpless. Zuri hugged him, feeling the warmth and purity of her son's love, and in that embrace, she found a spark of hope. Inside the house, Imani picked up the phone and called Jalil. His tone was stern, without a trace of the camaraderie they had once shared. "We need to talk. This can't continue." Jalil laughed bitterly on the other end of the line. "Now you want to talk, Imani? After everything you've done?" "It's necessary," Imani replied. "We'll meet at the usual spot. I can't let this keep tearing Zuri and Kian apart." "I'll see you there," was Jalil's response before he hung up. Imani knew the meeting with Jalil wouldn't be easy. There were many unresolved issues between them, and he wasn't sure how everything would turn out. But he knew he had to do it, for Zuri, for Kian, and for the life he had tried to build, despite his mistakes. Hours later, when the rain finally stopped, Imani drove to the agreed-upon location, an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Houston, a place that held many secrets from their past. When he arrived, he found Jalil waiting for him, with an expression that shifted between anger and resignation. "What do you want, Imani? Why can't you just leave all this in peace?" Jalil spat out the bitterness, his resentment evident. "Because it's not just about us, Jalil. It's about Zuri, about Kian. What we did in the past is destroying their lives, and I can't let that continue," Imani replied firmly. Jalil looked at him with contempt. "Now you care about them? After everything you've done?" "Yes, I care," Imani said, taking a step forward. "Zuri doesn't deserve this. Kian doesn't either. I need you to understand that what we're doing is destroying the people we love." Jalil let out a dry laugh. "Love? What love are you talking about, Imani?" This has always been about revenge, nothing more." Imani felt anger begin to boil within him, but he forced himself to stay calm. "That's what led us here, Jalil. Revenge, hate, resentment. But it doesn't have to stay that way. We can end it if we're willing to let it go." Jalil looked at him, his eyes injected with rage and pain. "And how do you propose we do that, Imani?" Imani took a deep breath before answering. "By admitting our mistakes, by letting Zuri know the whole truth, but also ensuring she knows she wasn't just a piece in our game, that what I feel for her is real." "And you think that will be enough?" Jalil asked with bitter skepticism. "I don't know," Imani replied with sincerity. "But it's all I can offer. I don't want to keep living like this, and I know you don't either." Jalil lowered his gaze, his shoulders slumped, as if the weight of years of hatred and resentment were finally crushing him. "Zuri will never forgive me, and I know it. But maybe you have a chance. If you truly love her, you should fight for her." Jalil's words surprised Imani. He had never expected his old enemy to offer him such advice, but what Jalil said made sense. If he truly loved Zuri, he had to fight for her, even if the road was difficult. "I'll do whatever it takes," Imani said with determination. Jalil nodded, finally resigned. "Then go. Talk to Zuri. I'll stay out of it." Imani looked at Jalil, surprised by his change in attitude, but he had no time to lose. He turned and left the warehouse, knowing that his next step would be the most difficult of all. Back at home, Zuri was still in the yard, accompanied by Kian. Imani approached, and Zuri looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. Imani knew the moment of truth had arrived. "Zuri, everything Serafina said is true. I can't deny that when I met you, my intention was to use our relationship to get revenge on Jalil. But what I didn't expect was to fall deeply in love with you. You are everything to me, and I never wanted to hurt you. But I understand if you can't trust me now." Zuri looked at him, her eyes full of tears, but also a determination Imani hadn't seen before. "I can't deny that you hurt me, Imani. The truth is, it hurts more than I can express. But I also know that during these years, I've found the love and stability I always wanted with you. What hurts is that you started everything with a lie." "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me easily," Imani said sincerely. "I just want you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove to you that what I feel for you is real." Zuri took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision. She knew that broken trust couldn't be repaired overnight, but she also knew that despite everything, she still loved Imani, and in that love, she found a small spark of hope. "I want to try to move forward, Imani, but you need to understand that it will be a long and difficult road. I can't promise you that everything will go back to the way it was, but I'm willing to try. For us. For Kian." Imani felt a wave of relief and gratitude. "That's all I ask, Zuri. Thank you for giving me this chance." Zuri nodded, knowing the path ahead would be difficult, but also understanding that the only way to move forward was by facing the truth and building on a foundation of honesty. The following weeks were a slow process of healing. Zuri and Imani worked together to rebuild the lost trust. Imani dedicated himself completely to proving to Zuri that his love was genuine, while Zuri, over time, began to open herself up again to the possibility of a future together. Kayan, for his part, finally learned the truth about his origin. The news was a shock to him, but with the support of Zuri and Imani, he began to accept his reality. In time, he understood that even though Jalil was his biological father, Imani was the one who had always been there for him, and that love and care were what truly mattered. Serafina, on her own, decided to leave D.C. She knew her presence would only bring more pain to Zuri, and she also needed to find her own redemption. Before leaving, she wrote Zuri a letter, asking for forgiveness for all the damage she had caused and expressing her hope that someday they could find peace. Zuri read the letter with tears in her eyes, feeling a closure she hadn't thought possible. Jalil, meanwhile, disappeared into the fog of his own guilt and pain. No one heard from him again, and deep down, Zuri knew his departure was for the best. Time passed, and though the scars of the past never completely disappeared, Zuri, Imani, and Kian found a way to move forward. The healing process was long, but with love, patience, and understanding, they managed to build a new life, stronger and more united than before. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.